Uh, Hi, good morning again, and welcome to this session on increasing revenue per sale by selling value to customers. You know, it's an interesting subject and one that has often been spoken about, one that has captured the imagination of many people. Mostly around wondering what's value and how do you sell value. I think we're going to attempt to address many of those questions in the context of selling. Art, the selling is really a combination of art and science. What I'm going to be talking about is mostly the science part of how to create value, where to look for value. But it also requires a fair amount of work towards orienting mindsets towards getting to work in that direction, and we'll talk about those things too. I just wanted to uh, initially start with a quick look at the company I represent. We are a company called Strat2Results, which is short for converting strategies to actual results on the ground. And we do this work mostly on the sales side in what we roughly club together as a category called sales excellence. It really has two parts. Sales excellence, I know in most cases, is interpreted to be having an excellent sales team, and that's an important part of it. But over a period of time, as business demands grow and as revenue demands grow, profitability demands grow, it becomes tough just for good or excellent salespeople to keep on growing. So you also need a very strong back-end sales operation, and that's where we spend a lot of time consulting. It's mostly about what's your market, how much of it can you address, how much of it are you willing to address, are you structured to, is your sales organization structured to be able to address that market appropriately, what are your go-to-market strategies, those kinds of areas. But that's still very much in the blueprint space. Subsequently, we also engage with customers into sales execution areas. When I talk about execution, the model we have extends beyond just sales, but most of the work that we've done is in sales execution. That's the reason we tend to focus a great deal on that area. From the projects that we've done, which is now with over about 40 companies over the last few years, we also found some interesting skill gap areas, and those are, as you can see, in this section over here. The first one is creating customer value, which is similar to what we're going to talk about in today's session. The other place where a lot of sales teams tend to leave money on the table is by not negotiating strategically and negotiating only the price. And so often, they end up leaving a lot more than what they could have got. So between these two, here's where you say, there's usually more value in a deal that you're doing with a customer than meets the eye when you're having a discussion with him. So this is just a set of techniques on how can you figure out where else the value lies, so you enhance the overall opportunity itself. And this is how do you negotiate strategically to get more out of the customer. Sometimes we face challenges in rolling things out, especially at the frontline management or even at the leadership level. And so there are some skilling sessions that we do on that space. But the idea essentially is to drive nonlinear results. Linear results. People we work with, the areas we work on, people are experts at what they do. So, if it's a question of driving 5%, 7% growth year on year, 10-year growth year on year, we don't think we have a lot of value to add. But if you're looking at nonlinear results, then you want to have a step change in the results you want. Then we can start looking at working with organizations that want to do that. Here are just some examples of companies that we've helped drive some nonlinear results. The first is a industrial automation major. They're a US-based company. They're in the supply chain to the manufacturing business. Manufacturing hasn't been doing well. They've been under a lot of revenue pressure and profitability pressure. At the same time, there are headwinds in the Chinese market, so their global management expects India to do much better, especially with all the all the directional stuff that the government in the country has been talking about, Make in India and so on and so forth. So we engaged with them, and we've now been working with them. We're in the third year now, and for the first 2 years, we've been able to help them drive their goal of driving revenues at 2x of market, basically growth. So if the market grows at 2%, they grow their revenues at 4%. If the market grows at 4%, they grow their revenues at 8%. Second example I want to take is of one of the largest engineering companies in the world. They had a really big problem internally of being too focused on processes. They were more focused on processes than on customers. And we looked at how do we change the culture in the organization to try and bring customers to the center of everything that they do, which is essentially a behavioral culture change kind of a project, which was measured by what kind of Net Promoter Scores they got when they asked their customers whether the customers were likely to recommend their company to anyone else. They started with a Net Promoter Score of 19 3 years ago, and last year, we were not the only ones who worked on it. Of course, there were things that they did internally as well, but the culture change part of it was with us. They were able to drive the Net Promoter Score up to 57. So that's nearly a 3 times kind of growth. Third example is of auto ancillary unit, tier 1 auto ancillary unit, one of 4 globally for this company. Not doing very well, highest costs, lowest profitability, and so on. Also the smallest. It is also the smallest of the 4 units, with lots of quality issues and so on. And it was really a question of viability, and one of the basic indicators that we could give back to the global parent for viability was, can we bring the profitability up to the global standards? And we helped them for a couple of years and were able to get that in place. Now, that's the kind of work that we do. But getting to specifically today's agenda, I want to talk about 4 things. Or rather, let me say 3 things. Creating value for customers is the primary objective. But to do that, I think one of the key things that we need to do at this stage is to understand what that value is. What do customers value? How do you define value? What kinds of value are there? Who are the consumers of value? These are all some questions that often come up and must be answered. If you do get a high level of understanding what that value is, it's important to then go and be clear about where to start looking for it. So if I understand what a customer values, I understand different kinds of values, or rather value that customer sees in whatever he wants. That's all very well, but where am I going to go and search for areas that I can add value in? So I think that's worth exploring a little bit. That's the second thing. And the third, finally, is, okay, I understand what the customer values. I understand where to look for it. Now, what do I do? How do I actually start creating, the perception of greater value in the customer's mind? Because fundamentally, what we have to think about today in a day and age where there is more and more commoditization and more standardization, essentially because of the advent of technology and the ready access to information. Why should a customer buy something from me that he doesn't buy from a competitor when both of us make probably almost the same thing? And that's really where the creation of value makes a difference in who's going to win that deal, or more importantly, who's going to get the maximum value out of that deal. After all, we are also consumers of value as sellers. So a quick look at what do customers really value. It's really a step thing. I mean, the first thing that the customer will be looking for is a solution that matches their needs, because if they're not getting a solution that matches their needs from from a vendor, there is no conversation beyond that. The second thing is if the solution does closely match their needs, then the customer is always going to be looking at a higher return on the investment that they make. What can I get? It's really a question of, you must have heard of the term WIFM, what's in it for me? The customer is not really interested in what's in it for me. And unfortunately, many salespeople are not really interested in what's in it for the customer either. They're only interested in what's in it for me as well. So when a customer is looking for a high return on their investment, they need to see that value not only in terms of a solution that matches their needs, but also a mutually rewarding relationship, a relationship that's rewarding both for the customer as well as for as well as for the person who's selling it. Because if both parties don't get the closest to what they want from a deal, there is going to be no deal, and there is going to be no value creation. Even if there is value creation, it's going to be extremely one-sided. Typically, in a case where you negotiate for features and then you negotiate for price, and the customer demands a discount, and there are price leaders in the market, you have not been able to differentiate your value from the other people. So, what is the customer going to do? He's going to differentiate you on price. And so at the end of a deal like that, the customer gets a lot, whereas you get nothing. So if you really want to create good quality value, or if you really want to create good value, it has to be fulfilling for both sides. But here are some interesting things about value, and I think it's important to understand them, right up front. Value is not tangible. You cannot touch it. It has no shape. It's not a product. It's not a price. Value is something that somebody perceives based on the inputs that they've received, based on the interaction that they've had with someone. There are many examples of this. For example, the one that comes to the top of my head is one in the retail space, for example, in the consumer space. We all go and watch movies. I'm not much of a movie buff, but one of the movies that has been in the news and stuff like that in the recent past is Dangal. You can get a ticket for Dangal at a cinema hall which is a single screen cinema hall, old cinema hall, for 125 rupees. You can also get a ticket for Dangal at PVR's premium product, PVR Gold, I think it's called, at 500 rupees. The movie is the same. Why are you paying 500 rupees in one place and 125 rupees in another place? That's because you value some things that another person may not. If you value, just the price or the convenience of where the theater is located, you may not be bothered so much about the comfort and the cleanliness and the facilities that are offered by a more expensive place. But if the other things are more valuable to you, then you'll certainly drive out some distance, maybe park somewhere, pay some extra money just to go and see a film, go and see the movie at a different place. So value is not that tangible. It's in many cases is perceived. More importantly, it has to be created. There is no such thing as I have created. There is value simply in a product that I create. That value has to be created. It can be created in many ways. In B2C, in consumer kind of scenarios, it's often created by touch and feel kind of events. It's by advertising, other marketing campaigns that people take it. In a B2B kind of world, it might be created by understanding what the customer really needs, and then going and building something around the product that enhances its value to product or service, that enhances its value to the person who's consuming it. I think what's important to understand is there is no standard for value. And when I say this, I mean it. There's no such thing as high value, low value, left value, right value, front value, back value. There's no such thing as I have created something of great value and therefore everybody will see great value in it and buy it. Different people see value differently, and it's important for us as sellers to be able to identify what that value is that the person sees, and therefore create it for that person, so that so that we have a higher likelihood of winning a deal, or of winning better margins on a deal. The next point is equally important, which is value cannot be created in isolation. value is created for somebody by somebody, and therefore it definitely needs to have more than one dimension. There is the consumer of value, there is the seller of value. You cannot create value in isolation and hope that somebody will buy it. And the last point I want to make here, the last principle that I work with on on value is that value is never permanent. You take the example of, say, public transport. I grew up in Delhi. I don't know how many of you did as well, but I'm sure many of you have grown up in cities where there are public transport systems. I grew up mostly climbing up DTC buses and getting off DTC buses. That was fine. There were also options of auto rickshaws and taxis. There were auto rickshaw stands and taxi stands. You had to call a taxi stand. If a taxi was available, they would show up. It was good to have a taxi stand with a phone number because you didn't have to go up there to get it. That represented value. It also represented value to me above traveling in a DTC bus because you definitely got a chair to sit in. I mean, you were the passenger, and they would take you from point to point, not from a bus stop to bus stop. So there was perceived value. But later on, we got these radio taxi services like mega cabs and Meru cabs and so on and so forth that came up. I no longer had to worry about the availability of a cab at a taxi stand because I could sit at home, call up a number, and it didn't matter where the cab was. They would show up. They were reliable. They were safer. They were cleaner. There were more of them. They had air conditioning, and I could get a bill at the end of it, which I could very easily present. At the if I was using it for a company expense, that represented value. So value suddenly changed for me in the taxi cab space. Now I don't even need to do that. I have these app-based taxi aggregators like Ola and Uber and a few others that make life even simpler for me. Prices are lower, availability is higher. There are different price points. I could choose a micro, I could choose a mini, I could choose a sedan, I could choose a premium SUV, I could choose anything. So if you see what I'm trying to say, the value is not permanent. Value keeps on changing as people keep on tweaking things around their product. The other thing that I'd like to point out here again is, it talks to the first 2 points that I made. It's intangible and it has to be created. Basically, what the Kali Pili taxi and what the mega cab guy and the Ola guy are offering me is exactly the same service. It's a cab. It shows up. I sit down in it. I get from point A to point B. So as far as the product is concerned, it's not at all different. But it's what's built around it. The intangible stuff around the product is what has created all that value. So these are some of the governing principles of value. They're certainly not all the principles, but they certainly are the more important ones. Why do we want to create this value? Let's have a look at it. What is it that you want at the end of the day? You want a solution that matches the client's need. That's what you're talking to the client about. Now, who wants it? The client definitely wants it. We also want it. Because if you don't create that solution that matches the client need, then the client, then one of the principles of values fails, which is that it requires two people or at least two dimensions. And so one of the things that we've got to start thinking, or a few of the things that we've got to start thinking about it, is do we tell the client that I have created some value and therefore it's good and therefore you buy it? That's one option. Or do we accept what the client says? The client says, this is what means value to me, and I don't care whether you bend over backwards or spend a lot of money getting it. As long as I want this, that's the end of the story. Do we guess what the client wants? Or, most importantly, do we mutually explore what value means? Right? What does value mean to me, and what does value mean to the client? And if we get to a point where we are mutually agreed that value that is created isn't something that I have created, independent of the client's view, or that the client has created independent of my view, or it's something that I don't want to talk about because I fear the client will negotiate or bargain very hard, therefore I will guess, or should we go out and mutually explore what this value is? In high value selling, it's usually recommended that one mutually explores with the client what is the value that the client seeks. And within that, one understands what is the value one can create for oneself. And that's usually the way that you're going to get to a point where both the client side as well as the selling side are getting the maximum value out of any transaction that you're doing. But it needs a change in mindset. I think, where you look for value would be a very, very pertinent question. So far, we've been talking about what value is, and presuming that that there is some agreement on the hypothesis so far. Let's look at the mindset, right? Most of us tend to have an inside-out mindset, and that inside-out mindset is driven by a human tendency, which is, if you put it in an acronym, is called WIFM. What's in it for me? And that's the way we approach all the conversations that that we have with our clients on the. That's the way we approach all the conversations that we have with our clients. Instead, one of the things that we need to look at changing our mindsets on is how do we ingrain an outside-in mindset, right? How do we say that my success will come if I am able to provide a solution that exactly matches the client's need, or I am able to meet the client's needs? How do I put value creation for the customer at the center of everything that I do? A lot of people say, how do you expect me to do that? I think that's a good question. And I think the answer to that is in examining the way we think about something when we're trying to do, or rather when we think about issues when we're trying to do business with a customer. What comes to our mind first? Is it, what do I have that I can sell to this customer? What can I get approved in my system as a price point or as a discount that I can give to the customer? What can I say so that the customer is impressed by what we have to offer as opposed to what the competitors have to offer? What is my product like? What are the kind of proof points I have for my products? This is normal thinking. This is what we all think about. But if we just try to flip this around, and instead of, because what is happening in this case, we are putting ourselves in the center of our thought process. My products, my pricing, my competitors, my features, my ability to influence a discount. What if we put the customer at the center of the thinking, right? What does the customer need? What's the return of investment that the customer should be getting? How's the customer's product going to become better, by putting this solution in place? It's just a question of replacing I with the customer. It's the same set of thoughts, really, right? And that's the basic mindset change. In fact, that's one of the when I talked about the client where we were able to increase the Net Promoter Score from 19% to 57%. This is exactly what the issue was. My ability to do this, my products, my features, my processes, my managers, my profitability, my top line. Instead of thinking about the same things by putting the customer in the center of it, right? Customers, return on investment, customers' efficiency, customers' profitability. Those are, that's essentially what I'm referring to here. And so, if you look at these two lines that I just put up, it's really about the word they. Are you thinking as they are? Are you creating what they need? Or are you thinking as what you want to be? And are you creating what you want to create? That's the difference in the mindset. So unless we're able to switch that mindset, that's the most fundamental point, of making the switch. Unless we switch the mindset, our ability to think through where to look for value will really be significantly diminished. Right? I would say a great place to start looking for value, or where you can create value, is to understand the value chain and see where you can make an impact. You cannot make much of an impact on the products that you carry. You may not be in product design. You may not be in a leadership position where you can make those changes. And in any case, when the products were designed and their functionality was designed, a fair bit of thought would have gone into who do we want to sell this to. So I think the first thing to understand is that we are not just in a market, but in this market there are customers. So it's not a simple case of I have a product, there is a market, I will find somebody to sell it to. There are customers out there, and if you look at it, it's not just about the customers, but the customers that we specifically target with what we have made, or what value we want to create around what we have made, right? So it's really a mindset to understand it's not just about customers, but it's about the customers that we target and the customers that we value. And the customers we value are the ones who are likely to pay us money for the products that we make. And that's how we have designed the product. So these two things are directly linked with each other. So the third thing to look for is, for the customer that I target, what's my value proposition? The value proposition is a long term. It just simply means what's the promise I'm making to the customer. You know, the client that I'm talking about is a manufacturing company. It's a large European and in fact a global manufacturing company. And one of the cases that we looked at for that client was India's largest manufacturing company. Or rather, let me put it, India's largest petrochemicals company. So you probably already know that. The relationship between these two companies is a good one, but there are issues. And the issues are as follows. When the person who's heading procurement for that for the client company, the petrochemicals company, talks about his relationship, he says, you know, these issues start at all kinds of levels. They start at you know, when we ask for a proposal in the marketplace, we get a lot of companies coming to us, and you know, a lot of companies that are desirable, a lot of companies that are not desirable. But when it comes to this company, you know, when we're ready to open up bids and things like that, we suddenly find that this is a company we want to do business with. And when I say this company, I'm referring to my client or ex-client. We always find that we have to follow up with them to send us a quotation. So, you know, where the sales team or the vendor should be following up with us, with the customer, on, you know, what they need and what specifications they should be putting in. Here, the customer has to ask the vendor for a quotation. And even after the quotation is received, and when the bids are being evaluated, you know, they find that a commercial bid, which is 30 pages, and a technical bid, which is 300 pages, the technical bid has already been discussed and closed. The commercial bid is still not closed, and it's taking weeks to do that, because you know, there are all kinds of issues. Somebody would have committed some kind of service to the customer verbally, but it's not made it into the it's not made it into the document. Somebody would have, you know, one department makes a small version of a component, another one makes a large version of a component, say for example a turbine. The terms and conditions of the guys who make the large turbines are different from the group that makes small turbines. I mean, is it a different product or is it a different company? You know, those are the kind of questions that that came up there. And so when asked the client side, you know, the client said, the value proposition for me is very simple. It's about, you know, please be integrated at the back end. Please make sure that you're communicating with each other. Please make sure that you're resolving these kinds of issues with each other before you come to us. Please make sure that you are consistent. Please, and at no point throughout this conversation did the client ever say that the product that this company makes is inferior or superior to somebody else's product, right? And so we have to be very careful that the customer that I'm targeting, what is the value proposition that that customer wants, and can I create that value proposition for that customer or not? I think there are significant opportunities on the side of delivering to customers as well. It's one thing to say what my promise is, but it's quite another to deliver it. There are, of course, significant opportunities that we can create to develop and deliver a value proposition for the client on the delivery side. I think It might be a good idea if we could look at, say, a situation where 90% of our customers are always going to stand up and say, such and such company, it's okay with the products, it's okay with the commercials and so on, but I buy their products because they're absolutely tops on delivery, and that's what really matters to me in my business. I understand they may be up or down a little bit on a few other things, but when it comes to delivery, and that's the real critical thing to me, because that's my input into what I give to my customers, these guys are absolutely hands down winners. You could start looking for value or where to create value in those areas. And that's when it really comes down eventually to the value chain. And that value chain is, how do I arrange my costs, therefore, so that we can offer something to the customer that's a value. That includes your value proposition, that includes your value delivery. And so what's something that we can offer to the customer that the customer likes, and so that we make some money on and so that we make some money on the deal as well. And that finally comes down to retaining customers, or value retention. Let me give an example of something that I experienced directly to give you a sense of what this means. And let's look at it end to end. I moved from Delhi to Gurgaon I think about 10 years ago. In Delhi, I used to live in an independent house that had 3 bedrooms and a drawing dining. So in the drawing and dining, I had 2 split unit air conditioners that were Voltas products, and in the bedrooms I had 3 window ACs. There were different makes. A couple of them were Samsung, one was Hitachi, and so on. When we moved to Gurgaon, I moved to my own flat, which is a 4-bedroom flat, and so I felt that what I needed to do in terms of air conditioning was to buy myself an additional window AC. And I thought, both products were working well. At that time, at least, I thought the Hitachi unit was a better unit, although it was a little more expensive. So I thought I'll go and buy myself an additional Hitachi unit. But when I landed up in the condominium where I bought the apartment, the management of the condominium told me that we don't permit window ACs in the condominium. This suddenly presented a problem. Firstly, I didn't intend to fight. I intended to comply. Secondly, it meant that I would have to buy 4 split units instead of 1 window unit. That created some, obvious financial issues, because I had just bought the house and I just got all the painting and the woodwork and all done. So I didn't want to spend that much money. I wanted to buy something that was reasonably priced, a reasonably good brand. And so I went and hunted in the market, and I eventually went to the CST canteen, because my father's an ex-army officer, so I can avail of that facility. He can avail of that facility. And they had some LG units. They sent us to an LG dealer, and I was still evaluating whether I wanted LG or not. And this guy was, the salesperson there was all over me, saying our turnaround time for service is 3 hours. We'll install in 3 hours, we'll repair in 3 hours, we'll replace material if it's available in 3 hours, if it's not available within 24 hours. He gave me all kinds of stuff, and I got a little irritated. He was also offering me a year-long service. So that's, the value proposition part. He was targeting me as a customer, trying to sell that stuff to me as value. It's a different matter that I didn't see that as value. But when I started looking at this box here, for those customers that I target, what is my value proposition? I think he was offering me service as a very, because he understood his product as a commodity, so he was offering me service as a value proposition. Given the position I was in, I said, well, 4 units, maybe I should buy a maintenance contract. So I bought one. And I bought myself a value proposition that this guy offered me. Then we come to this box. If you don't deliver, that's bad. Now let me extend my story a little bit. I've been here in Gurgaon for 10 years. I thought when I bought those 4 LG units, saying, if they start popping off in 6 years, 7 years, it's okay. I'll just replace them one by one with whatever's a premium brand. Why? Because That's what I wanted to buy. I wanted to buy premium, not because LG is good or bad, but simply because I wanted to buy a brand that was premium. It's now 10 years. Two of my old ACs have popped. I replaced both of them, but I replaced both with LG. And here's the reason. At this stage, on the value proposition, they told me that we'll turn around every service request you have inside 3 hours. For 10 years, they had delivered on that value proposition without fail. I no longer care whether the other brands have 5-star ACs, 7-star ACs, things that use less power, more power, whatever the heck it is. Because in Gurgaon in the summers, the temperature goes up to 45, 46 degrees, and when my AC goes down, I want it fixed in 3 hours, and I know LG is going to do it for me. Right? Now, I don't know how as a company they've arranged their costs, but they're able to deliver something really nice to me. A product that works. I mean, I've heard all kinds of marketing stuff about, how other people are making products that are soundless or use less power and so on and so forth. But they give me what I want. As a result of which, they've been able to retain their customer, and they don't have to find a new one because I'm just going to stay there until something, something catastrophic happens. So I use that story basically just take you through this whole cycle that you're not just in a market, but in that market there are customers. It's not about customers, but the ones that we target and those that we value. For those people, what is the value proposition that we have created? Are we delivering that value to them or not? How do we arrange our costs so that we can offer something nice and still be profitable? And therefore, how do we retain our customers? There are many, many examples. I can give you another one. It's the same thing with multiplex theaters. For those theaters, what are they? They are basically distribution points for movies. They're not selling you the movie, they're selling you the theater. Right? They're not just in a market. In that market, there are customers. And of those customers, not everybody is their customer. There are those that they value because those customers will pay them 300, 400, 500 rupees for a ticket. For those customers, what is the value proposition they have created? Their air conditioning works, the seats are clean, you get food on the food at your seat, the bathrooms are clean, there's parking, they're in a mall, so you have 10 other things to do. It's the kind of customer who will come to a mall and spend a fair amount of money. That's why they've created the value proposition. And they keep on delivering that to us. Sound quality is good, picture quality is good, seats are clean, everything that they promise, they'll deliver it to us. I don't know how they've arranged their costs as sellers, but they've definitely managed to do that. I think part of it is really because they have to pay high rentals to the malls and to the people who sell them prints. Part of it is recovered in the pricing, but part of it is also recovered in in giving out contracts to all the food vendors that are out there, who charge you a lot of money because they're paying a hefty rent to the theater operator, and all of us are happy paying that money. Because they deliver all this to me, I'm able to retain my customers, or they are able to retain their customers. Now, you have to put some thinking into this. What are the stages of your engagement with the customer, and where exactly can you create, or where exactly can you look for that value? Three ways that you can add value. You can create new value. It's usually pretty tough. You need to be pretty innovative for it. You got to create something that doesn't exist and hope that people will buy it. But nevertheless, people do create new value, quite frequently. You can add value. What that means is there's something that already exists, and we keep on adding new value to it, which allows us to give somebody a better experience, and at the same time get better prices out of it. A typical example of this in the industrial world is the way, let's say, software companies operate. You take, for example, a product like Microsoft Office. I still use Office 2010. It came out 6.5 years ago, because all the features that I need are out there. But Microsoft has released more versions of it by adding value to what already exists and leveraging some of the new things that have come in, like, for instance, the tile interface in Windows 8, or all of the marketplaces that you can go, app stores and things like that, the Office App Store, the Windows App Store. So they've added a lot of value around that, and they're charging people additional money for that. There's another thing that you can do, which is what we refer to as extending value. It's usually done mostly in consumer plays, but sometimes can be done in consulting and other service plays, maybe even in industrial products. Here's how it works. These are your typical, you know, two for one kind of things. If you go to Marks and Spencers, you want to go buy a shirt. They'll be selling you a shirt for maybe 1,000 rupees, but if you're willing to pay 1,300, they'll give you a pack of 3 shirts. Right. There are people who have clearance sales in which they say you buy one, you get one free. That's what happens on the consumer side. On a service side, say consulting or coaching kind of services, what people often do is this: customer says, no, I don't have a budget to pay you, say 1 lakh rupees per consulting day. I need 10 days of consulting. Consulting company may go and say, I'm not going to reduce my rates. Please bill me for 8 days at 1 lakh a day. But I'll extend this to you by giving you 2 additional days of free service. Sometimes that happens on the coaching side as well. So in this whole cycle of identifying who are your customers, creating value for those creating a value proposition for the customer that you can deliver to the customer, that you can fund and therefore keep your customer, you have to look at, is it a value creation play? Is it a value addition that I'm doing? Or is it or is it some value that I'm extending? So you have to look in the value chain. Now, if you look at each of these boxes, by looking at these boxes or by saying create or add or extend jobs, you're not going to be able to figure out where the opportunity lies, and that's where it's really important to start looking below the surface. And this is where the human interaction comes into the picture. If you remember the principles that we spoke about, those principles are really about things like, value has to be created for people. It requires 2 dimensions to be created, you and somebody else who sees value in it. It's not tangible, therefore it has to be created on the experience or something else. And that's where, the greatest problem that comes up is is what this line says, that the great enemy of communication is the illusion that communication has happened. That's not necessary at all. So if you're going to dive into any of those 6 boxes in the value chain and try and figure out whether you're going to create new value, or you're going to extend existing value, or you're going to add value to existing stuff, it's only going to happen if you have good, strong communication with the person for whom you're trying to create that value. And therefore you can't have illusion about communication. I'm sure you've heard of the iceberg model. If you look at an iceberg, you only see 10% of the iceberg above the surface of the water. I mean, 90% of the iceberg, which is the bulk of the iceberg, is actually below the surface where you can't see it. And that happens in the case of communication as well. People say a lot of things at the top level, at the surface, but the real meaning and the insights actually lie deep below. So it's really a question of how are we diving into the words that we're hearing? Is this simply I hear a word, take it at face value, and move on in life, assuming that assuming that it means the same thing to everybody, or do I dive deeper, much like a scuba diver in the case of an iceberg, of course, a very cold scuba diver, I can assure you, to try and understand meaning, the meaning of what the customer is really trying to say, or more importantly, what the customer really wants. Most importantly, of making the customer perceive things or see things in a way that he has not seen in the past. That's where you begin to add value, right? And so, do you want to dive down deep there? Because most of the time we guess that because we understand what something means to us, it probably means the same to everyone else. Of course, we can't do it in this webinar format, but in workshops, I just often ask people to do this. I give them an English word that's a common word, let's say something like fun or trust or whatever it is. And I ask them to write down in 30 seconds in as many words as they like, 1 word, 5 words, 2 sentences, 1 sentence, whatever it is, as to what that word means to them. And I have found that in a group of 15 odd people in a workshop, I could get as many as 10 to 12 different words to describe something as simple as the word fun or the word trust, which all of us use on an almost everyday basis. And that's the real crux of it. If that's the case in a group of 15 people, and that's the number of interpretations or meanings that people take out for a small, simple English word, can you imagine how many interpretations or how many meanings must be derived in a document, let's say that's about 50 pages of a commercial document that is going to be vetted by 20 people on the client side and 20 people on the vendor side. I mean, the kind of meanings and interpretations that can come out are just mind-boggling. And so, you know, while you can't address all of them, I think it's important to start looking at Pareto's principle, which is the 80-20 rule. What is the 20% of meanings and interpretations that are potentially going to give us 80% of the you know of understanding? And it's best to work on that basis, because then the rest of it becomes relatively easier to resolve. So I would say that, you know, if you want to understand whether you can create value or add value or extend value in any of the parts of the value chain, then it's really about diving down into the 90% of the iceberg and trying to get to the same page on what the customer means and how the customer interprets something, and do I interpret it in exactly the same way as the customer does or not. So we talked about, you know, what does the customer really want and what do we really want? A solution that matches the client's need. We also said because we want that value and the client wants that value, and that we're going to create that value potentially by going into one of those 6 boxes in the value proposition. But let's understand one thing very clearly. For mutual exploration, which is what we said is the best way, not the way we see it or the way you see it, but the way we see it, then your intent is going to count much more than your selling technique. And your intent can only be shared with the client through interaction. And so it's really important that you have that interaction. So how do we go about trying to figure out? I think one of the key things that we do, you know, not too well is listen. Most people think they listen really well, but here are some interesting things. The word Chinese, listen in Chinese is written in this way. It has 5 parts. Right? It says ears are for listening to words. Eyes are to look at the person they are listening to, because that gives you a lot of understanding of whether this person understands what he's saying, whether he's being genuine or not, whether he's making eye contact, and therefore, you know, there is a high level of trust between the two. Is he showing anger in his eyes? Is he showing disinterest in his eyes? So many different things. Right? Is the person paying attention to what they're talking about, or what they're talking to you about? Is there, you know, is there any indication that they're not that interested in the conversation, which could mean either one of 2 things. They're, you know, really not interested, so the project or the sale may not be that critical, or that you are not making any impact on them at all. And so, you know, that gives you the ability to sort of interpret and change what you want to do. I think intent sits squarely in the heart space, which means listen with empathy, understand what are the emotions behind the conversation, and eventually, you know, that's just as much about giving respect to the people that you're listening to. You know, most of the time there are 4 or 5, actually 6 different states that you know, that we can be in. When we are in a conversation like this, when you're trying to sell to somebody or negotiate with somebody. There is one situation called win-lose, which is the standard situation 90% of you or plus of humanity finds itself in. For me to win, you must lose. So if as the seller you're saying, for me to win, you must lose, it means that as the seller, I must get the maximum value out of it, and that necessarily means that the customer doesn't get the maximum value. Unfortunately, the customer is thinking the same way. The customer is saying, for me to win, you must lose. And so he's saying, I must get the maximum out of this for me to win, and if that means that you lose out on profitability and so on, so be it. The second one is lose-win, where I'm okay if I lose as long as the other party wins. There are lots of people who sort of fall in that category. There are those who are only, there's one state that's called win. It's typically the kind of situation that you and I are in when we're buying an airline ticket to go to, from one place to another place as a one-off purchase. I don't care whether the airline makes money or not as long as I get the best price. The opposite of that is lose-lose. I won't let you win, and if that means I lose, that's fine too. And the best one, of course, is win-win. For me to win, you must win. But for you to win, I must first understand what a win means to you, and that's where the listening part of it comes in. So listening is an important skill. The other thing that we have to be really careful about when we are diving deep into the diving deep to get into the insights and understanding at the meaning and interpretation level of the iceberg, is to mutually understand the words that are being said, which are the top 10% of the iceberg. What they are saying is only 10% of what the entire picture is, right? And therefore, to find a key to finding that solution that meets the needs begins with both of us being on the same page with respect to what the client means. Unfortunately, most of the time, the onus of that lies on the seller. And so the seller needs to have the skill to get to the same page. Let me try and give you some inputs as to how one could do that. Right? The words that you hear, the 10% of the iceberg, or what the person is saying to you, usually tend to be a point solution that the client has defined that he needs based on his own understanding and his own interpretations. But you are an equal part of that solution by being the person who's supplying it. And you have had no input into that context at all, right? And therefore, if you stay with the point solution that the client has defined and that the client is asking you to pitch for, then you're not enabling open conversations. How do you do this, right? It's really by asking the right kind of questions. So the first thing is, what I say, listen hard to the words. And when you hear the words, ask questions that reflect active listening, right? And understanding of the client's perspective. What's active listening? Let's explore this a little bit more, right? Ask questions that will evoke discovery. Ask questions that will take you to aha moments that say when the client is saying, I want such and such solution, this is the pain that he is trying to solve. Aha, I now understand, right? So that's, the questioning technique needs to be one that's looking at discovery, and we'll come to that as to how you do that. We'll come to that. Let me just cover this part at the moment. So, explore. Ask open-ended questions to get greater clarity, understand the whole story, understand the context of the solution in the context of the story. Why that's important is because the client, when he's discussing this with you, is not interested in your business. He's interested in his business. And so if you want to get on the same page with the client, you need to understand his business and you need to understand his solution. Only then can you actually start talking about what it is that you can offer. Move the client more towards what is it that they desire rather than the solution. What's the outcome? So what, typical question of this kind is, so if a solution like this gets put in place, what's the upside of it? Let the client come up and say the upside is, we get more efficient. You may want to ask another question. When you say efficiency, can you sort of measure that? Is that in terms of rupees, dollars? Is that in terms of productivity per person, which then translates to dollars? The guy comes back and says, yeah, it's a pure profitability move. We will get more productivity and we're going to get more profitability. So if you ask a question, then what's the extent of that profitability? Immediately the client starts seeing what's the impact of what he's trying to do. And this is when you're on the solution side. Again, I said I'll come to that in more detail in a moment. But listen to the words that they're saying, explore the words that they're saying by asking open-ended questions, and asking questions that are going to get you insights, and then focus the conversation on business problems and results, not on the solution. Because the moment you focus the conversation on the solution, you start getting to feature conversations, and you start getting to pricing conversations and discounting conversations. So keep it to business problems and results, and here's how you could do it. Seek evidence of the problem. Ask questions that are going to say, so, hey, Mr. Customer, when you see this kind of a, what do you observe, or what happens? What do people do because of which you want a solution of this nature? It's an open-ended question. Let the customer come up with it, because that gives you many words that you can then start exploring deeper and deeper, get a broader understanding of the customer's problem, because the bet is, if you have a broader understanding of the customer's problem, you're likely going to have a more comprehensive and a closer solution for the customer than your competition will. The guys who didn't have that kind of a conversation. Understand the impact of the problem. And one simple way of saying that is, so what would happen if you didn't address this problem? Right? Don't do it. Why do you want to do it? What's going to happen? Let's understand why what the pain is. The customer may come back and saying, I'm missing out on 500 crores worth of market opportunity because I don't have production capacity. That's why I want to put this in place. The impact to me is 500 crores of top line, and at say a 15% margin, 75% of profitability from this plant alone. Right? You now clearly understand what the impact of the problem is. I'm betting though, when you ask the customer, what happens if you don't do this? Can you quantify that in rupee terms? 9 out of 10 customers are not going to be able to do that. Think of it yourself. If you are the customer and somebody asks you, what would happen if you didn't do this? Can you quantify it for me in terms of rupees and paise? How often are you able to do that? But it immediately gets you to start thinking, right? And that's the whole idea. Because the moment you start thinking, or the seller forces you to start thinking, he's beginning to add value, because he's making you see things about your business, or ask questions to you, and you ask questions to your business that you haven't been asking in the past. And you immediately start creating value right there. Right? At the next level, I think on the solution side, you could then explore what the solution would look like. And I think it's good enough to be direct with the customer to say, if you were to get a world-class solution in this space, what would it look like? I think if you've got the customer talking to you with respect to the impact of the problem, you're very well placed for the customer to have a good conversation with you on what a world-class solution will look like. The customer probably knows what he's put on the RFP, and he's going to say the same things to you. But I think here's where the difference really comes up, because the moment he reaches the end of what he has to say, either you remind him, or he's going to look at understanding the impact of the problem, where you put down a few questions that were left unanswered, for which the customer doesn't have answers now when you're trying to look for solutions. Many customers very often will turn around at this stage and say, hey, you're supposed to be the expert in this space. Why don't you tell me? That's a great place to be, because now you're a trusted advisor. You are now sitting with the customer, and together you are creating a solution that matches the customer's need. The probability of the customer saying that's a bad idea to something that he himself proposed is extremely low. And the probability of your going wrong or making any guesses in a conversation with the customer where you're jointly defining some kind of a solution is also extremely low, because you'll get corrected right away. And that's where the same paging comes in. And then the moment you establish the payoff of the success, the customer is going to turn around and say, you know what, if I don't do this, I lose 75 crores in profitability. If I create a world-class solution which now looks a little bit bigger than what we were looking at, this project might be a 700 crore project instead of a 500 crore project. And you know what, I may be able to improve my profitability to 20%, and that's about 140 crores. What's the gap between 75 crores and 140 crores? Can I pay a premium to this vendor because I'm making an extra 60 crores or 70 crores because of the value that is brought to me? The chances are that you probably either win the contract at the same price but with a higher margin, or you might actually win a contract with a higher price and a higher margin. And that's the way I'm saying, that you start unearthing opportunities with customers by listening carefully, by getting on the same page with the customers and then structuring your conversation in a way that's similar to the one that we've described, which is ask open-ended questions, dive deep to understand the impact, ask open-ended questions, and dive deep to understand the payoff of the payoff from the project, and it'll get you to. It's more likely than not to get you higher value, higher revenue per sale when you're going out. We usually recommend this being the sequence: start here, go here, then come here, and go here. So seek evidence first. Evidence of the problem, understand the impact of the problem, explore what the solution would look like, participate in the conversation to define that solution if possible, and establish the payoff if success is achieved. I think you have far greater opportunity of maximizing revenue. But it's really about getting to the heart of the matter. Now, there are many questions that that one could ask. But there's a sequence and a type of questions that we've seen working very often. Firstly, how many questions do I have to ask? Is the customer even patient, or does he have the time to give me those answers? Our sense is it usually takes 2 to 3 levels of inquiry with the customer to move from soft. When we talk about soft evidence, we're talking about. If you ask the customer, what do you see or what actually happens, what do people do because of which you believe you want to solve this? Oh, we see that people are spending too much time on non-productive activities. That's soft evidence, right? If you want to get to hard evidence, you say, so how much time would that be? Right? And then the customer might come up with, I think we could have productivity enhancement of about, say from $200,000 per head to about $240,000 per head. Now you're getting to hard evidence, right? So it usually takes about 3 levels of inquiry to move from the soft evidence to the hard impact, right? So please don't stop at the first level because that's not going to get you the best results. So I've taken a 3-level. So it's a bit like this structure. I don't know how much like an onion it looks, but anyway. I have taken 3 levels of the onion and saying peel the onion one layer at a time. We would say the first question is going around, because if you ask a very direct question for numbers straight away, you're not going to get it, and you may not get the opportunity to ask a second question, right? So the first question should typically be about clarification and evidence of clarification about what the customer sees or perceives, evidence about what he notices, because of which he's looking for a solution. When you get an answer to that, and let's say the customer says, oh, we think we could enhance productivity, good way is then to dive down and say, when you say productivity, what exactly do you mean by productivity? Is it revenue productivity? Is it hours that people use? So the customer may come up with, oh, it's a bit of both. Maybe it's more towards the product, more towards the revenue side. Oh, okay. So what's the average revenue that people are generating right now? And that's when you might probably go and say, oh, they're doing $200,000, and you might have your impact right there. On the other hand, you might want to ask another clarification or evidence question at that point, which says, are you looking at average revenue per employee, or are you looking at average productivity per employee, or are you looking at average productivity per salesperson? What exactly are you looking at? Oh, I think we want to do this stuff because we're looking at an average productivity per individual, and then you could get into the next level of dive. So it's really peel the onion one step at a time. It's 3 levels. First question, go around, ask for clarification and evidence. Next question, pick up a word or words and ask for the impact or a specific value. Now, one thing we've often noticed is the people you're talking to may not have that value, or the people you're talking to may not have thought of it in value terms. And so it's okay to ask, okay, fine, so on a scale of 0 to 10, where does it stand? How important is this aspect of the business? If it's a 9 or 10, that's great. If it's less than that, if it's a 6 or 7, or 7 or 8, it's probably not that important an issue. If it's less than 6, it's probably irrelevant. but you're also opening the customer's eyes to that, right? And there again you start adding that kind of value. So the technique is very simple. Think of it as an onion. You want to get to the core. It's 3 levels down. Usually it takes about 3 levels to get to the actual impact. At the first level, ask clarification and evidence question. Next question is an impact question, or next few questions are impact questions. Then you pick up some of the words that they're saying there, ask them a clarification or evidence question out there, and then you ask an impact question. Then it's third level of clarification and evidence, and you ask an impact question. Word of caution, it's not always that you'll need to go to 3 levels. So if you've got your answer after 2 levels, please don't ask a third level just because there is a third level. That's that's the art that's where the art comes in. So effectively, what we're saying is, what's value? We saw the principles of value. We saw what kinds of value there are, and who consumes that value. Right? And should we tell what the value is? Should we accept what the client says? Should we guess, or should we explore, mutually explore what that value is? Now, in mutual exploration, we looked at where can you look for that value. It's all down there in the 90% of the iceberg. And that 90% of the iceberg could roughly be looked at the value chain. Who's my customer? What's my value proposition to him? What's my value delivery to him? How do I distribute my costs so that I give him the value that he needs? And therefore, how do I retain my customer? How am I going to find that out? I'm going to find that out by listening well. I'm going to find that out by asking the right kind of questions that are open-ended, that are looking at solutions, that are looking at business results as opposed to features and pricing that the customer wants. What's the technique I can use? The technique I can use is peel the onion, which is 3 layers. Ask the go-around question first, then ask the impact question. Ask the go-around question next, ask the impact question. Do that at 3 levels. And that's the way you can really seek to create and enhance the value that you take to your customers. I just want to close with Pareto's principle. The reason why I'm saying all this, and the reason why we've talked about all this, is simply this: only 1 out of 5 people typically spend a great deal of time on inquiring on inquiring effectively from customers. They usually spend, 4 out of 10 people will spend their time trying to work on features and pricing. When that happens, then you're never going to find out the real issues. So I would say spend 80% of your time on 20% of the most important issues. In other words, spend 80% of your time inquiring from the customer about what he really wants, as opposed to, and just spend 20% of the time, on the pricing and the solutions and stuff like that, as opposed to spending 20% of the time on inquiry and 80% of the time on solutions. You start doing that, you'll start seeing results. That's what I had on the content. I will now take any questions that you might have.